This is Saskia, and this is Note to Self, your weekly dose of everything that's simply too long to text. Consider this your personal invitation into my inner circle, where I share my thoughts, feelings, and quiet reflections that usually live inside my Notes app. Thanks for joining me. Hello, and welcome to Note to Self. It is, God, I know I make this joke every week, but it really is like my comfortable way to start the episodes to talk about the weather. It's a gorgeous day here in New York. Last week I was stuck in my apartment all week. I have had the worst allergies imaginable. Like it's insane. I thought I was sick all week, which I actually think I had a mild cold, but I also think it was just really bad allergies. And someone who grew up in Australia, which is me, I have never had allergies before. Because where I grew up in Australia, we did not have seasons. It's pretty much summer all year round. Even our winter, it's like maybe low 20s in Celsius. Keep that in mind, which would be like high 60s, low 70s in Fahrenheit. So winter was never really something we went through. We didn't really have spring. We didn't have fall. It was literally summer and then a slightly cooler winter or cooler summer, which was our winter. So I never had really experienced the breadth of like 4 seasons until I moved to New York. And I guess that was around 10 years ago. And I noticed that when I moved here, must have been my first spring. I had started to get like a runny nose and I was coughing and sneezing all the time. And I just kept thinking I was sick. And I was like, what is this? And then I realized it is allergies, aka hay fever. Never knew what that. Well, I knew what it was. I just didn't get it. So I've now discovered that I have seasonal allergies, which every year I forget I don't. And then spring rolls around and these same symptoms happen and I forget what they are. And I sit here being like, why do I feel this way? And then I see all the pollen floating through the air and realize what is going on. But as always, I start this podcast off with a weather update, but this time it was like a health weather update. So, jazzing things up a little bit for you guys. I'm honestly going to try my best to do a podcast episode where I don't start that way. I wonder why it is that we feel the need to talk about the weather is like it's like a default when you feel uncomfortable. And I think whenever I start this, it's like the trying to get into the zone. And maybe there's something in that. It's like something that one is relatable to anyone that's around you that are at least in the vicinity in IRL conversations. Sorry for the people who are listening who don't live in New York, and this beginning part of the episode is so boring. So I wonder if it's just like immediately you have something that you can both connect with. That's probably why, honestly, because I do it a lot. I talk about the weather all the time. I mean, my Alexa is set up to read me the weather every day. I need to know what the weather's going to be for the next day. It's something that I think about a lot. And I know some people do not think about it, but I think about it a lot. Anyways, other than suffering from seasonal allergies, which I know many of us can relate to, if you need a really good natural supplement, there's this one called, I say quercetin, and I know that's not it, but it's Quercetin, if you want to Google it. I get mine from Thorne. You can order it on Amazon, although I have heard ordering supplements on Amazon is not good. So I've started to order it directly from Thorne. But my naturopath recommended it. And it's really good to help with allergies is more like a natural way instead of having to take like Claritin or something every day. Mine are pretty bad right now, so I do have to take some of the medicated stuff, but I pretty much take it all year round because it helps if you're someone that has like high inflammation in your body generally. So it's something that just kind of supports me with that. And my one friend who gets seasonal allergies says it's totally helped her. So she has found it incredibly beneficial. Anyways, Jeffrey was away this weekend, so I had a really nice solo weekend. And for those who live with a partner, you know how lovely it can be when you get the apartment to yourself. You can have solo time. It's so peaceful. Everything is clean. Everything is in the spot where I've left it. And I just get up and I'm quiet and I have my coffee and I sit on the couch and read my book. And it's just peaceful. And not that I can't do that with Jeffrey, but there's something totally different about when you get to do it by yourself. I think I just love my alone time. And I've been reading the Fae and Alchemy series. There's 2 books. The first is called Quicksilver, which I'm sure people have heard about. It like blew up on Book Talk. I don't know when it was, last year or the year before. I think it might have been earlier than that. But it's another romantasy series, which I really liked it because I was reading Blood and Ash and it was not a vibe. I really hated it. I was 3 books into like a 10-book series and was like, I cannot do this. I'm done. So I put it down, which I never do, as I was forcing myself to read this book, and then picked up Quicksilver. And I just finished Brimstone, which is the second one, and the third one comes out later this year. It's a great year for romantasy because we have one new ACOTAR book that's being shared in 2 parts. So we get 2 books, which is so exciting. And then I think, we're getting a new Quicksilver, or the Fae and Alchemy series book. And then I think there's also another, the other one about dragons, the dragon series. You guys know what I'm talking about. Dragon, look, I'm going to Google it. I should know this. Book series. Why am I forgetting? And it's not coming up. Definitely don't like this. Dragon book series, romantasy. Wow, this is fun for you guys. How excited are you? I Googled this. Fourth Wing. Yes, I think we're getting another Fourth Wing book soon too. Anyways, back to the Fae and Alchemy series. It has everything you want from a romantasy series. Strong female character discovering her powers, hot, sexy love interest, and hot, sexy love sex scenes. Love that. They like play it. They're actually like really good. They're probably the best ones I've read. I was like, these are hot. A rich historical fantasy world. We love. I need good fantasy. I want long historical references of how these communities were built and how the Fae came to be and how the vampires came to be in this story, and who was running who, and plot twists and all of the above. These people have lived for thousands of years. We need some rich storylines. And I want some unexpected outcomes. And the end of book 2 ended on a jaw dropper. I had to read it a few times because it was so good. But I did make a promise to myself this year that I could only do one romantasy series, and then I had to split it up with another book that wasn't romantasy before I went into another series, because I literally have only read romantasy since I read ACOTAR 2 years ago, and then proceeded to read all of Sarah J. Maas's books, Fourth Wing, the Blood and Ash series that I stopped, and now this series. So, girl, I need a break. But I don't, because I love it so much. But I decided this is something I need to do. I need to expand my reading horizons, because I used to like to read lots of other books until I fell into this rabbit hole. But I've moved on to Lena Dunham's new memoir, Famesick. I'm a slow reader, but when I finish, I will talk about it on the pod. And so far, it's really fascinating, and I'm only 1 chapter in. And she was obviously such a big part, I feel like, of my kind of 20s in New York. She was a millennial voice, and as a millennial, I really kind of connected with her and what she was saying and her experiences. I really am interested to hear read her memoir. And then over the weekend, I decided I need to get out and be a real human. So I walked to a local park that's in my neighborhood. It's called Prospect Park. For those that are not from New York, Prospect Park is in Brooklyn, and it's the 2nd largest park in Brooklyn. It's not as big as Central Park, but it's still very big. And it was actually designed by the same designers, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, who did Central Park, and it opened in 1867. And I was doing some research into this because I was interested. Central Park was first completed in 1858. Then they followed with Prospect Park. Apparently, Prospect Park is often considered their more refined masterpiece creation, following the work on Central Park, which I found super interesting because I've always thought of Prospect Park as kind of more organic. It is less groomed than Central Park in a way, because there's lots of areas where you're just on these little tracks and you feel like you're up in upstate New York in the forest. But apparently the reason why they felt like it was more superior is because they had more space and fewer existing restrictions. So I think that feeling of the escapism and feeling like you're at a forest in upstate New York was exactly what they were trying to achieve. Anyway, when you walk through the park from the northern entrance, which is my entrance, there's this huge arch, and it's called the Grand Army Plaza, and it's kind of looks like the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. So you immediately feel transported. And I always feel like I'm in Europe when I look at that and kind of try and ignore everything else around it. But I went to this park, which I've been to before, but I've never really wandered aimlessly through it. And I always get lost in this park. I get so turned around. And I was there for about 2 hours, and I just found some of the most beautiful spots where there were the most insane trees I have ever seen, so big and so lush, and they all were this beautiful lime green color because it's spring and all the leaves are so fresh and freshly green, just glistening under the sun. And I sat under this big oak tree and leaned against it and just meditated, and then continued wandering around. And then I saw people doing horse riding, and I was like, oh my God, is there horse riding in this park? Which there is, and I've been trying to find a place to do lessons because I was doing lessons in LA one summer and I really want to keep doing them. One winter when I was there. So I just found all these little areas and little pathways and moments where I was just the only person surrounded by all these trees, and it just felt so wholesome and rejuvenating. And it really made me realize that it's wild just how healing it can be to be around nature. I mean, I already know that, but I think I just didn't realize that park could provide that, and it's so close to my back door. I always think I have to get out of the city, but it's right there, and I just was so thankful I decided to go there that day because it really changed my whole energy for the week ahead, I found. So if you're ever in New York, go check out Prospect Park. And if you live in New York, go to your local park. I may not be saying anything new here, but it's so healing and I love it. And I can definitely, as someone who works from home, get very homebody and not want to go anywhere. So it's good for me to have a place to go. And it also came at a very opportune time because the next day, I had my therapy. And I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, but I will explain for new listeners here briefly that I've been learning a lot about something that happened to me as a child that I never really considered to be super traumatic. And long story short, when I was 4, my family and I lived in a place called the Daintree, which is in far north Queensland. It's full rainforest, super remote. The closest city was 4 hours away. My dad had this huge 100-acre property that was mainly all rainforest. And it was this is where I was born and spent the first 4 or 5 years of my life. So it was just my mom, my dad, and I on this huge property. We lived in this big house that he had built that was just, imagine a huge open plan loft almost. And it was built up on stilts because a lot of the houses you had to build up because you would get floods. And I just have such fond memories. It was the most magical place you could ever think of. We had this big tree house that my dad would take me up to. It was just so many trees. It was so peaceful. It was right on a crocodile-infested river, but I wasn't thinking about that as a kid. And I just felt like I was surrounded by fairies. And my parents would always say that I was talking to the fairies. So when I was around 4, there was a huge flood. And we get floods like this every 100 or so years. They're not as common. And it destroyed everything. Our house that was 20 feet off the ground was underwater. And my mom and I were actually not there at the time. We were visiting my grandmother who lived in a different city. And I always thought that this never really affected me because I wasn't there. But my dad was there and he had to evacuate. He had to get on his boat to go pick up my aunt who was pregnant, and she was with her son and her husband, and they had to swim through crocodile-infested water to get on my dad's boat because it all happened so fast. These floods happened so fast. And they all got out to safety. And everyone's, dealing with the trauma from this. But long story short, I remember pre-flood, but I have zero recollection of post-flood. I always thought that we just left and we went overseas because we lived overseas for a year. But apparently, through therapy and talking to my parents, I've realized that we actually did go back and we were living back at the house, cleaning up for about 8 months. And I have zero recollection, which is just crazy to me that I do not remember it at all. And what I have realized in therapy that I actually have a lot of held in trauma as a child, not being able to conceptualize what happened during that time. And maybe it's not even conceptualize, but it's understand what happened and also verbalize my feelings around it. And my parents never really sat me down and explained it to me. They were just surviving, which is, I understand. It was not top of mind to think maybe we need to sit down and tell our 4-year-old what happened because you're just trying to figure it out. And I think from a young age, I really taught myself that things can just be taken away. And it's created this very anxious attachment style. And there's a lot of pain behind that. And I think the more I've kept diving into it, I've had so many times where I'm just like inconsolably crying as I keep saying, I just want to go back. I want to go back to my home. I miss my home. And I think it's me as a child never having processed those feelings, now processing them as an adult because they've been all buried inside me. Therapy, guys, it's so amazing. You got to do it. Everyone, please. It's so fast. I find it just unbelievably fascinating. I would never want to be a therapist, but I find it very fascinating. Anyway, as I work through it more and more, this specific scenario, I think one of the biggest things I miss, and I've spoken about this again, is that I've chosen to live in a very busy city life, one of the busiest cities in the world. Interesting choice. But that is a side of me that I love. And I think there's another side of me that's my inner child that just wants peace and quiet and absolute solitude, like where I grew up and where my home was ripped away from me. So I think going back to the park that day really fulfilled that itch. And it's slightly different because I am still surrounded by people, but I found these moments of solitude and quiet because I think the busyness and the loudness of this all can be really overwhelming for me at times. And ever since I was little, I always loved trees. And when my mom first took me to Sydney, she said that the first thing I said about, I was like, Mom, where are all the trees? So I feel very connected to trees. So being at the park and seeing all these gorgeous, beautiful trees and being around them was just so healing. And I think it just shows that no matter where you are and no matter what your history is or your trauma, you can find ways to help heal that in kind of inadvertent situations. Like I wasn't thinking that I'm at this park and healing this child inside me, but looking back on it now, I realized that those small little moments are all part of the healing journey. Therapy is not linear, and you're not going to have these big moments of, sometimes you do have aha moments, but I've found that like the growth is happening in these small incremental kind of moments, again, over my life where I start to see the changes flowing through. But crying about missing my home and going to the park, those are all ways of healing that small child. And I think it's really interesting that something that, happened to you that maybe you thought didn't make any impact has actually, in my case, made one of the strongest impacts on my life. And it's really filtered into so many different ways about how I've created my worldview, how I exist in this world, and my beliefs about what has happened to me. And what is this value and worldview? That nothing is permanent and anything can be taken away. And I think that's why I'm someone that likes a lot of control, because if I can control everything, then maybe it can't be taken away. And that's something I've had to work through because ultimately you cannot control anything in your life. I think the only thing that you can control is how you show up in this world. So that's what I try and tell myself, is that I am controlling this by working on myself through my therapy and my own individual work, but everything else I have to let go of. And I think that's why today's topic really hit me in the way it did, because everything I've been sitting with in therapy, this idea of essentially pain that isn't acknowledged and hurt and trauma and things that are taken from you that nobody can name or explain, it shows up again in my pop culture pick of the week, which is also my topic today. So it all came together very nicely. And it really was, in a way, I was not expecting. But today, I'll be diving into, as my pop culture pick of the week, I need to work on that. And also my topic, season 2 of Beef. Now, please note, there will be spoilers ahead. Sorry, guys. I can't not give spoilers when I'm going to do a deep dive into this episode. So either skip to the end, which is the whole episode, or just play it through. Keep up. It's good for my algorithm. Or listen to it after you watch the show. I'm going to try and avoid like big spoilers, but I can't promise anything. But just listen to it either way. It's an incredible show. I'm deep diving. So let's go. So Jeffrey and I think that Beef season 2 is better than season 1. And it's so interesting because I was reading some of the comments on Reddit, which maybe I was just on a specific Reddit thread that was Haiti on season 2, but people were saying how they really didn't like it. And guys, I don't know. I don't know if I can deal with Reddit. There's too many opinions. It's a lot. It's just like a lot of energy on Reddit, I'm finding. Anyways, there is also some useful information on there. But there was like comments about how, they were just really missing the entire premise of the show. And people were making these comments being like, there's all these Gen Z references. And I was like, what? Like literally everything in the show is a millennial reference. The creator, writer, and I think he directs some episodes of the show is a millennial and speaks about the millennial experience being his inspiration for both his shows. Anyways, this was a weird way to get started, but I think why that this is really interesting is he has a very nuanced take on millennial culture, and this is why I've loved both his shows. But why season 2, I think, is even more interesting to me is the relationship dynamics. So season 2 starts out with a young couple that's witnessing an alarming fight, a very intense, toxic fight between their boss and his wife. It's set in Montecito, California, and the couple who are fighting are Josh and Lindsay. Josh is played by Oscar Isaac. Stunning. Love him. And Lindsay is played by the phenomenal Carrie Mulligan. Love both of them. Great cast. Both of them are just, incredible. I think this is the third piece of work they've done together as well, and they've always wanted to do a relationship, the two of them, so they were both very excited when they were both working on this. Now, the couple who work for them, their names are called Austin and Ashley. So Austin is played by Charles Milton, who you might recognize from the movie May December, which was that incredible film with Julianne Moore and Natalie Portman. He played the young student who Julianne Moore was dating. She was his teacher. And then it flashes forward and it follows their relationship as they're still together and have had children together and kind of the community response to their relationship. And Ashley is played by Kaylee Spaney. So we have Josh played by Oscar Isaac, Lindsay by Carrie Mulligan, Austin by Charles Melton, and Ashley by Kaylee Spaney. So Josh is the general manager for this members-only country club that's owned by a Korean billionaire. So it's set in a very elitist world. All the members are celebrities and billionaires. Billionaires, millionaires, I don't know. So the fight at the beginning of the show triggers the premise for the entire show. It's the second scene of the show pretty much, which, as we know from series 1, the initial conflict always triggers a series of decisions and actions that have larger consequences than any of the characters could expect. It really makes the characters question their moral compass and how your moral compass changes over time, as well as their moral baseline. And I think the question is, how far are you willing to go? And as a part of my review, I have a few things I'd like to call out that I really loved about the show, and things that I really learned from watching the podcast with the director. So he did a podcast after the show where he interviewed the 3 different couples that are a part of the show. I'm not going to go into the third couple as they don't play a huge role in at least my review. And he also interviews the composer and the director. Now, I would like to start with the main couple, the relationship between Josh and Lindsay, Oscar Isaac and Carrie Mulligan. They are our millennial couple. I found this relationship to be incredibly triggering because I think they write the fights that the couple gets into extremely well. Albeit it was a very heightened version, I do feel that the fight, you could immediately see that there was a long history with this couple, and there was a lot of pain and a lot of love and a lot of regret all wrapped up into this fight that happens and sets the premise of the show. And the first scene, which is their major fight that, sets everything up, you see 2 people bringing up multiple things that have happened over the years together. And I think this is such an important choice in the script because we all know what it's like when you get into a fight with your partner and you love to bring up things that they've done in the past as a way to kind of set your moral high ground. it's something that Jeffrey and I have been working on when we're trying really hard to not bring up old things or stuff that they've done in the past that we've then worked through or forgiven as a way to, act superior or throw it back in their face. Because it's really unfair to bring yourself back to something that you've already worked through and accepted. And you can't really use that as ammunition in an argument. But we all do it. And I think this scene specifically really showed that. And in an interview with Carrie Mulligan and Oscar Isaac, when they were talking about how they were shooting this scene, Carrie was really struggling to move from the point of the fight where she gets to a point in the fight where she ends up throwing a glass of wine. So she throws the glass at the wall. And she just wasn't finding that there was a line in the script that was really her making her feel like it was authentic for her to throw that glass. Like, what is going to drive her to have that visceral anger just to throw the glass across the wall? And it was feeling really forced. So they huddled with the director and with the creator. I always get confused because like Lee, I think, directed some of the episodes too, who's the creator and the writer. So I should check when what episodes he's directed. But they started to dive, I know that they huddled with Lee at this stage, so they started to dive further into the reason behind the fight. And they came to this line that Carrie says, which really unlocked it all for them. And the line is, "You've wasted my whole life." That is just, it's visceral. And that was the key that unlocked the anger behind their argument. And when she starts throwing the glass and she grabs his golf club and she's destroying his office. And this is when Oscar is trying to pull the golf club back from her, and the younger couple looks in and sees it because it looks like he's about to like hit her with the golf club. And that line, "You've wasted my life," is just so powerful. And you could feel that anger of looking at this person and realizing you've wasted all this time with them, and just how awful that feeling is. And I just felt it was so incredibly well written. And what a cool discovery to have on set when you're trying to figure out what is going to make this fight so authentic. And you have this freedom there to discuss it with the creator and Oscar and finding that line that really breaks through everything. But I found the relationship between these two characters was just so nuanced. And when I went back and rewatched that first fight scene, you really see that there's so many lines. And when I mentioned like the things that they're throwing back in each other's faces, when you finish the show, you learn more about what these lines mean and the triggers behind them. So when you're first watching it, you're just like, whoa, they're like going at each other. But then as you start to understand who these people are, you realize how pointed these kind of insults are. So for example, Josh makes a comment about, "Thank God we never had kids." And that really sets Lindsay off even further, because you can see that's such a deep trigger for her, because I think they had tried to have kids and you find out that she had a miscarriage. So again, it's just like a stab in the wound. And then she makes a comment because Josh was saying how amazing their life is. We're friends with all these interesting CEOs and billionaires and amazing people. Hell, we went to lunch with Bono last week. And Lindsay goes, "They aren't our friends. We're their employees. We work for them. They are not your friends." Which again was, I think, a really interesting line because it ties into the last episode when you kind of do see that ultimately a lot of these people that they're surrounded with that Josh thinks are his friends are not his friends. And ultimately his dream is, I think, to be one of these people, but he is and still will always be an employee to them. He has a service to offer. So it's so vicious, this fight, but there's just so many elements of realism here. And, I have been in fights with Jeffrey, and there's something I'm really not proud to admit, that I can get really vicious in the things I say. And I do it as a way to try and like elicit a response. And that's something that I'm trying to work on and figure out kind of where it came from. It's something I've brought to therapy. Like I can get really vicious and say really mean things. And I really don't like that about myself. And I don't mean those things. And it's honestly was hard. It's hard to even say right now on the podcast, because it's like that's a really intimate part of myself that saying out loud is just not something that you always want to share. But these parts of ourselves that we really bury, I think often our partners are the ones who get that raw version of us, and they are they are visible to these parts that we bury. And I think in this scene, there was just such a raw version of so much pain and so much hurt, and what happens when that pain and hurt is not being worked on. So the show opens with this fight, and then I think I'd like to talk about their relationship further and actually how the show ends. So you open with this fight. The show continues on as you learn more about their relationship, and then the show ends. And it ends with one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen on television. It brought me to tears. Skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to hear this, because this is how the show ends. But Josh's character is being arrested for money laundering, which throughout the show you realize is kind of the premise of where all of this is going in terms of actually what's going on behind the scenes. He's taken the fall to protect Lindsay, and they're in Korea at this stage. There's a lot of how we got here. But essentially, he's like, I'm not going to let her take the fall. I'm going to take it. And he's being escorted out of the building that they were in, and Lindsay's out in the crowd, and she sees him being arrested. And all of a sudden, she like climbs over the barricade and she runs to him. And there's this incredible piece of music playing that's super synthy and dark and just so powerful. And it was written by Phineas, who did the score for the show. And I'm going to talk about the music in a little bit soon. He sent this piece of music to the director, and the entire last scene was built around this song. So the scene shows Lindsay running to Josh as he's being escorted out and arrested, and she kisses him, and they have this deep, passionate kiss, just saying how much they love each other. And you can just feel the passion, and you see so much love, which is such a contrast to the first episode with so much hate and visceral hate to just deep, deep, deep love. And she's saying she's going to be there for him. She's sorry. She'll wait for him. Because I think ultimately these people do have deep love for one another, and they just have not worked through their shit. And it's just so sad to see how their shit has just like ultimately like destroyed them. And in an interview with Oscar and Carrie, Oscar said something really interesting, which just sat with me. And he said, when you really allow yourself to feel the full love of somebody, that's usually called grief. That just, it really affected me, because the full spectrum of love is also grief. And when you lose somebody, you open yourself up to feeling the full tide of what that love is, and what the full tide of the human being and who they are. And I think in that moment, Lindsay is realizing she is losing Josh. And that's when she realized, and he realized, how much they actually really love each other. So the arc of this relationship was incredible and so freaking well written. This is just like two things I'm talking about, the beginning and the end. And they are very unlikable and they are selfish, but it is very truthful, which I really appreciated. And I think something else that's interesting to note here is season 2 was inspired by the creator, Lee Sun-jin, who was overhearing a heated debate coming from a couple that were his neighbors. They were in their home, which is very similar to season 1, where Lee also experienced a road rage incident that inspired season 1. So again, something happened in his life, which I love, this like mild kind of thing he overheard inspired the whole show. And he said he overheard this fight, and then he went and shared it with a lot of different friends about like what he had heard. And he said the contrasting reactions he received when retelling the story is kind of what set up the whole premise of the show. And he found that the younger kind of Gen Z peers were like aghast and concerned and like, oh my God, I can't believe this would happen. Whilst the millennial Gen X peers found the, intense argument very relatable, which prompted Lee to look at this younger love versus older love. And you see that. You have the Gen Z couple and then you have the millennial couple. And I think this is just so incredibly profound, because I've even felt this in my own relationship, where I've shared things with my sister who's Gen Z and she is younger, and she's really struggled to see how some of these arguments we're having are normal and okay. And I don't necessarily know in our situation if maybe it is Gen Z. I think it's also your family and they want the best for you. But I do find that my millennial Gen X friends immediately are like, hell yeah, I've gone through that. Like everyone fights kind of thing. And I just think that younger love, there's a lot less stuff there. And there's less barriers, there's less history, there's less trauma. And, you see that in the relationship with the Gen Z couple at the start of the show between Austin and Ashley. It's a lot simpler. And as the show goes on and their relationship develops and there's more stuff they're dealing with, the complexities start to arise. And that's different for Carrie Mulligan and Oscar Isaac's character, where I feel like they've gone through so much of the mud and they just can't get out of it. And Carrie there's a scene where she makes a reference. She's chatting to Austin's character and she's like, oh, you're in the honeymoon phase. It doesn't last forever. Enjoy it. But the way these relationships were written is just, guys, it's just really well done. And I'm just so happy to see something that was really authentic, albeit hard and uncomfortable to watch and sad, but it also shows the power of like working through your stuff. And I think that's what they did not do. But these relationships were really, really well done. And what an interesting way to come up with a story based on the reactions you saw from friends talking about the fight. Because it's so true. It's so real. We can all relate to that. I mean, I think about relationships in my 20s compared to now. They were breezy. Like you didn't have as much stuff. I wasn't thinking about half the stuff I think about now. So it's a very, very cool concept and unique concept to dive into on a show. Now we're going to pivot a little because now I'm going into another part of the show that I really liked, which is very different, but I'm specifically looking at episode 4. So this episode felt very different from the others. And I think the creator is trying to send a message here. It followed Austin and Ashley as Ashley was hospitalized. So the whole episode is set in the emergency room of the hospital. Part of the initial story is that Austin and Ashley essentially use the fact that they have seen this fight and they took a video of it and they bribe Carrie Mulligan and Oscar Isaac's characters to get Ashley more of a management job at the club. She works at the social club, but she's just like a server. And the main reason they want that is because she really needs health care, because she's found out that she has a cyst on her ovary and her ovary is at risk of torsion, which means it would like twist and she could lose her ovary. So that's when all like this is happening at the beginning. There's all this bribery happening and things like that. So she now has health insurance and she has collapsed at work and she's had to go to the emergency. And she's, feeling much better because she has this health insurance. But when she's getting there, she is kind of realizing and starting to learn about the American healthcare system. And I think this whole episode was really a take on the state of the American healthcare system, which is a mess. So it was shot almost kind of like a thriller. It was like kind of Black Mirror-y and it was really uncomfortable. And I think the goal was really to show how archaic our healthcare system is and how dystopian it almost felt. And her and her partner were talking about their deductible, and their deductible is $5,000, which is a pretty high deductible. But she had, I think, probably not great health insurance, but she doesn't know that. So she thought that, oh, great, I have a $5,000 deductible. That means if the procedure's less than that, do we get money back? Which I thought really showed her naivety. And God, wouldn't that be nice? But that's not how deductibles work. And unfortunately, you have to spend up to $5,000 until you're covered. And that's what she did not realize. So it really showed the insanity of the system. So the episode, like I said, felt very dystopian. And it continued on making all these other kind of comments about the American healthcare system. And one of which I thought was really, really important. And it really looked into how women's pain is not being taken seriously. So after she has waited in the waiting room for nearly 8 hours and her pain is continuously being put as like not urgent, other people are getting pushed ahead of her. Finally, she ends up in a hospital bed and she has an ultrasound checking for torsion, which she had been warned could happen. And the doctor comes in and has read the ultrasound and said, you're fine. There's no torsion. And Ashley's like, are you sure? I really think there is. And she's really concerned, but she's starting to second guess herself. And she's saying maybe it was food poisoning. I don't know. And, she keeps saying it really feels like torsion though, but she just can't. She's totally second guessing herself. And she's asked by the doctor what her pain level is from 1 to 10. And she says a 9. And the doctor then questions that and says, well, an 8 is unmedicated childbirth. So is it as bad as that? And she goes, well, I haven't experienced childbirth, so I don't know. And then she starts to re-question the pain again. And then she's questioning the scale because I think she was misunderstanding the scale. And all of it was just very messy. And there was no support offered for her. Finally, she passes out from the pain and she wakes up. Turns out they had to rush her to surgery because the doctor had misread her ultrasound and she had torsion. And unfortunately, she lost one of her ovaries. So why is this episode so important? Well, it actually highlights a real problem in our healthcare system. And I spoke to a friend who works in this field of research and in medical research, and she shared some really interesting information with me. So until 1993, women were not required to be included in clinical trials in the US, which means that medical data that we've been working from on how pain works, how treatments performed, was gathered almost entirely from male subjects. So for half the population, that data is potentially inaccurate. And then if you go further, there's been a review of studies done on musculoskeletal pain found that male patients were more likely to receive diagnostic testing and exercise recommendations, while female patients were more likely to be referred for psychological treatment. So when a woman says she's in pain, the system is more likely to treat it as an emotional problem rather than a physical one. And then a major study also found that when a female patient leaves an emergency department with a pain complaint, she is significantly less likely to have received any treatment for it than a male patient with the same complaint. So when healthcare providers were given a clinical scenario of a patient in pain and they were told the patient was female, they rated the pain as less intense than when the patient was a male. And these are real studies that have been done about this. And I had read about this prior, but I wanted to make sure I had the correct information and that this was a real thing. But this is the system that women are navigating. So when they walk into a medical office and say, I'm in pain, they're not being taken as seriously as their male counterparts. And this is exactly what happened to Ashley. And I really think this was a specific reason that he wrote it this way and filmed it this way, was I think to probably tell a story. And I would love to know if he has his own experiences of women in his life that maybe have gone through something like this. And I mean, even in the show, they say to her, oh, maybe you have IBS or anxiety. And like, oh, do you know how many times I've been told I have IBS or anxiety? It's just like bullshit. Women's pain is definitely not taken seriously. But that to me, what a pivot. Like you're in this, that could be a whole show just based on that. And it was such an interesting choice to have that episode. And it ties totally into the storyline. It didn't feel disjointed at all, but it was such an incredible take. And I remember just sitting there being like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's so dystopian. But then you realize what's so sad about it is you're like, this is the real state of our healthcare system in the US. Now, I know I've been going on for a while, so I have a few more things I want to talk about, then I'm going to wrap things up. But next, I wanted to discuss some of the symbolism of the show. So there was really interesting imagery used throughout the show, and each episode had a different title card, with the background being a piece of classical artwork. And one that caught my eye was in episode 6, and the painting is one of my favorite paintings, and it's titled Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. And the image depicts a seaside landscape, ships in the background, a man walking with a horse and cart in the foreground. And if you look closely in the bottom right, you see 2 flailing legs representing Icarus. And Icarus is a character from the Greek mythology who died after ignoring warnings and flying too close to the sun with wings made of feather and wax. His story is a cautionary tale about excessive pride and the dangers of disregarding advice, which ultimately is a massive theme throughout the show. Again, I love that the title card of the background of the image meant something in relevance to the show. And I'd love to go through and look at all of the different title cards. That one just caught me because I love that painting. And another interesting artwork that was referenced was in the final scene of the show. The show ends with a shot from above, and it's slowly zooming out to reveal almost what looks like a clock with different scenes from each of the couple's lives playing out, shot from above. So it's Lindsay and Josh having a fight, and it's Ashley and Austin sitting in these deck chairs, and you see these different seasons of their life. And the creator, Lee Sun-jin, spoke about how this scene represented all the different characters being in different seasons of their life. And Chairman Park, who's the Korean woman who owns the club, she is at the center of this clock. And she is the season of winter, the final season of life, as she rests her head on the grave she's visiting, and she's filled with regret. She's older. She's at the final stage of her life. And the idea was actually based on Buddhist and Hindu paintings called samsara. So samsara, apparently these paintings represent the Buddhist idea that we're stuck in a cycle of samsara, of eternal love and death and life and suffering. And all these paintings kind of have this circle motif with these vignettes of life, and then they have this monster that's holding it, which is the god of death. And this was the final scene. And as you fully zoom out, you see the monster from the samsara paintings that's holding this kind of take and this vignette that we've just had on these people's lives. Beautiful symbolism, guys. It's just, it's spectacular. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love shows that are so well thought out, that bring in art and music and just incredible writing. It has every element of a fantastic show. It brings me so much joy. Which next brings me to another theme I wanted to look at, which is the moral compass. And I had mentioned earlier that a value of the show was examining individual moral compasses and how they change over time. And what was interesting here is throughout the show, each of the 4 main characters had these flashes to different versions of themselves. So it's like one of them was in a scene and they're talking to another character, and then all of a sudden the other character is them. It was really odd. And like, you are never really told what that means. So you kind of have to figure it out yourself. So this was my assumption. So for Josh and Lindsay, Oscar Isaac and Carrie's character, the flashes for Carrie, she was seeing her younger self. So for a quick little glimpse, she sees her younger self. And I think it was yearning for her youthful beauty, because so much of the show is her yearning for her youthfulness and looking at going to Korea to get all this like skin stuff done. And she's constantly wanting to be younger. And I think she's very jealous of Ashley's character and her youthfulness. And then you see Oscar, and he sees himself when he's speaking to one of the guests. And then all of a sudden it switches to him, same age as he is now, but it's like he's one of the guests. And I think he's yearning to be one of the quote unquote elite. And he's this chase for money and power. And I think with money, he thinks there comes power. Now, for Austin and Ashley, which are the younger couple who are played by Charles and Kaylee, Austin sees himself as a father. So this is the stage when they get to Korea, and he sees himself as a father with a Korean partner and a child. And I think at this stage of his journey in the season, it's him really craving and yearning for his connection to his Korean heritage. And at the time, the love he thinks he has for this other character in the show. And Ashley, she sees herself as a hostess. So she's on the plane and they're flying first class over to Korea. This is her first time ever being in business class. And she sees herself as the hostess for a moment. And I wondered about this because hers to me was the hardest to figure out. And I think for her, she has always seen herself as the help. I don't know if she necessarily saw more for herself until she saw this opportunity that she had thrown in front of her with the video to ask for more. And I feel like in that moment, she still can't see past what more she could be, but she's starting to morph into it, because you start to see her really fall into this new persona of wealth and kind of this like upper class in a way. And she instantly switches, but I feel like internally she still sees herself as the help. So I felt like these flashes that they showed of these characters was just so interesting, because it really depicted their inner wants and kind of how their moral compass will change in order to achieve those wants throughout the series. Just such an interesting choice there. And that was just my take on it, but I really loved that, where you could see these little it was a really kind of jarring thing in the show. But I thought when you saw all 4 of them by the end, I realized what they were trying to say here. And then finally, as I wrap up my review, I had to acknowledge the music. So the creator, Lee Sun-jin, said he created a playlist of 800 songs he listened to inspire the music. Again, as I mentioned, Lee's a millennial through and through. He's the same age as Jeffrey, and he really lent into the millennial experience for many references throughout the show. But the music really stuck with those like millennial bangers. It really reminded me from my college years. They had music from Hot Chip, Tame Impala, Daft Punk, M83, Midnight Sun, shout out, love that song, Phoenix. And he worked with Phineas, Billie Eilish's brother, who scored the show and wrote incredibly moving original music. And the song that really stuck with me that was an original that Phineas wrote is called Vicious Thoughts. It's dark, it's moody, it's filled with these like deep synths, which I feel like was such a kind of, so many of the bands were using synths at that time. And it reminded me so much of the music from that time, but it brought just this like huge emotion to the closing scene. And I think I had mentioned to you this closing scene is really going to stick with me forever because apparently what happened is the song was made, and I think I mentioned this at the start, but I just want to reiterate it a little more. So Phineas made this song. He sent it to Lee, not sure where they'd use it. And Lee was like, this is how the show's going to end. Like, I don't care how we get here. This is the emotional core of the show, and everything has to lead to this song. And the song really led his writing to close the show. And I just thought that must be such a cool way to write is you know this song and you're like, I want the show to end on this song, so I will make my writing work towards this beat. And you really see how it paid off because the scene is just so emotional, so beautiful, so heart-wrenching. And I'll just watch it over and over again and I will consistently listen to that song because it is so, so good. So honestly, I could go on about this show forever. And I had to cut my notes because I had so many. And like, I honestly could do an episode on every episode if I could just dive into one episode per podcast. But I think the more I've gone back and watched it as I was like rewatching scenes for this podcast, I just noticed more subtle references. And I just think Lee Sun-jin is just a mastermind in his work. I adore his work. I adore the cast of this show. So please go and watch it. We need more art like this that's super thoughtful and truthful. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 5 being an average, I give it a 10 plus. Those who watch the show will understand the reference. But I feel like I've been going on for a while. That's it for today, folks. And as I close out, I've been sitting with, I think, why beef affected me so much. And I do think it's the reality of relationships. And what happens when you don't do the work? The relationship slowly erodes. And despite the love being there, it just isn't enough. Love is not enough. And if you don't work on yourself and if you don't work on your relationship, your trauma will always take the forefront. And the characters in this case became more and more selfish, putting their wants before anything else. And they did that until they finally lost it all. And eventually they had to let go of that. And I think it's just the cost of not doing the work and not communicating and falling into this corrupt cycle of more and more and more. And just like my trauma as a young child, it affects my relationship without even realizing it. And it's something I've needed to examine and start to work through. And without examining it, my wants and my needs will become the forefront of my relationship, and they're coming from a very bruised place. And these can never be fulfilled by anyone but myself. So unless I can work on them, they will become the front and centerpiece of this relationship that I am in. And the same goes for my partner. But ultimately, I think pain that isn't acknowledged, it doesn't go away. It just finds another way out, whether that's in a fight with your partner or in a therapy session 20 years later when you're finally letting yourself cry over something I didn't even know I had buried as a child. And I just think that's why art, like Beef Matters, it holds up a mirror and it says, look at this, sit in the discomfort, examine how much you're carrying, and then ask yourself what you're going to do about it. So if anything resonated with you today, I'd love to hear from you. As always, you can find me on Instagram at note-to-self_podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate the podcast on Spotify and subscribe on YouTube. It genuinely means the world to me, and it really helps with growing the show. I will see you all next week. Thank you. I know this was a long one.